Our top story this morning, Custer County Attorney Wyatt Glade has been working for more than a year to get toxicology information held by Montana DPHHS into the hands of local law enforcement and prosecutors. Glade says the information was surprisingly difficult to get.
What I noticed is that the Department of Family Services, who regularly investigate incidences of child abuse and neglect, were coming across instances where children had been exposed to methamphetamine or other dangerous drugs, and had evidence of that in the form of toxicology tests, primarily hair follicle tests, and that they were not providing that evidence to law enforcement officers.
Even after a bill that Glade worked on was signed into law during the last legislative session, DPHHS was still holding the toxicology reports. Only in the past week did he receive a letter from Director Sheila Hogan that they had officially changed the information sharing policy.
I can't believe it took this much work. And I can't speak for the department. I mean, I'm sure they have their reasons for this, but I couldn't find any that I agreed with. The way that I discovered that this needed to happen is I was simply trying to get the department to provide this information to law enforcement officers, and the level of just sandbagging and stonewalling that I received on that particular front did shock me.
Glade says DPHHS was using a federal law designed to protect the identities of patients in federally funded substance abuse centers. He argued that the children caught up in these drug situations were neither in federal institutions nor addicts seeking treatment, and thus did not fall under guidelines of federal law. A federal grand jury has indicted 2 Canadians and their company on criminal charges stemming from an explosion that injured 3 workers at an eastern Montana oil recycling plant. Custom Carbon Processing, its president Peter Margiotta and project manager Mark Hurst face charges of conspiracy, endangerment, and Clean Air Act violations, according to the indictment unsealed last week. Prosecutors say the 2 men ignored warnings from a company foreman leading up to the December 29, 2012 explosion near Webo along the Montana-North Dakota border. The blast sparked a fire that burned for 8 days. Margiotta and Hurst did not appear for their January 11th arraignment. They would have to be extradited to face trial and could not be located for comment. Court documents show they haven't been served yet with that indictment. Missoula voters are likely to see another school levy on their ballots this coming May. Missoula County Public Schools Communications Director Hatton Littman said school trustees approved the ability to place a levy on Tuesday night and gives some preliminary projections on what they could look like.
The levy in the elementary district would be just a little over $272,000, and in the high school district it'd be a little over $178,000. And based on our very early projections, what we're seeing is that even if voters pass these over-base levies, we would see a net tax reduction for voters.
The approval doesn't guarantee that a levy will appear on the ballot. Littman says the possible levies will cover costs outside the reach of the over $158 million in bonds passed in 2015.
These levies are called operations levies. So the only thing that they can fund are annual operating expenses, things like paying for teacher salaries, paying for classroom supplies, paying our utility bills, things like that. They're very separate and distinct from the bond, which taxpayers passed in 2015. That bond can only pay for construction and capital expenditures on our building.
Trustees will have to formalize the ballot levy language by April, so the final levy amounts won't be known until then. Staying with schools, this is National School Choice Week, and there are only 2 charter schools in all of Montana. One is in Bozeman, the other a partnership between the communities of Libby and Troy. Superintendent of Bozeman Public Schools, Dr. Robert Watson, described the unique charter school that exists within the structure of Bozeman High School.
What's unique about our system in our charter, it's not necessarily based on the amount of time they spend in the class. It's not based on what we call seat time, but it's based on are they achieving proficiency of the curriculum.
Watson explained how the Bozeman Charter School was able to get past the overall opposition by the Combined Montana Teachers Union.
One of the requirements of the Montana charters is they have to be approved by the locally elected Board of Trustees, and they have to be managed by the local school district. The staff that works in the charter schools have to be certified as teachers in the state of Montana.
MCPS Communications Director Hatton Littman said Willard Alternative High School comes closest to the charter school model here in Missoula, but exists in its own building. The chief objection to charter schools from the Combined Teachers Union is that no public dollars be diverted from publicly funded schools. The deadline is approaching for public comment on a plan to lift federal protections from grizzly bears in the northern Rocky Mountains. The Missoulian reports that comments on the plan are due by tomorrow. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has proposed habitat-based recovery criteria to monitor how an estimated 1,000 grizzlies are recovering in the mountains between Glacier National Park and Missoula. If approved, those criteria would guide Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and several federal agencies in managing the bears if they lose Endangered Species Act protection. A population of about 700 grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem around Yellowstone National Park was delisted last year and turned over to state management. That decision has been challenged in federal court. At a Senate committee hearing this week, Montana Senator Steve Daines promoted Montana coal as part of an all-of-the-above energy strategy for the West and for the entire country.
One critical piece of our energy infrastructure in Montana and across the Pacific Northwest is a coal strip power plant. It supports about 750 direct jobs, generates enough power for about 1.7 million homes and businesses across Montana and the Pacific Northwest. Through heavy-handed regulations, litigation, and some state policies, the future of this plant is actually at risk.
Daines used the example of a visit to Taiwan, where the heat wave caused a power shortage there.
We just came back from Taiwan last year it was September. If you remember what happened in Taiwan in August, they lost electricity to about half the homes across Taiwan. It was a major outage. And why? Because they were too aggressively going forward on eliminating nuclear energy from their balanced portfolio. They had a plant that was ready to go back in 2014 and was battling some of the regulatory issues to get it up and running. And with that peak load, a hot day in August, they lost their base load.
In 2017, Daines asked Energy Secretary Rick Perry to protect the Colstrip coal-fired power plant. And finally, in neighboring Idaho, an airplane approaching a rural Idaho airport had to abort its initial landing after a mountain lion was spotted on the runway. The Idaho Mountain Express reports the Delta flight from Salt Lake City to Friedman Memorial Airport in Haley Saturday night was delayed about 20 minutes due to the mountain lion. Airport manager Chris Pomeroy says airport personnel attempted to corral the cougar, and its tracks later indicated it had been roaming outside the perimeter fence for a couple of days. Idaho Department of Fish and Game officials say a conservation officer shot the lion in order to protect the public. Our News Talk time now, 6:39.
Newstalk, KGVO.
Missoula's official weather station.
Snow possible through the morning hours. By the afternoon, we'll see our temperatures in the mid-30s under partly to mostly sunny skies. Our next wave of moisture will arrive tonight with a trace to 1 inch possible. I'm meteorologist Brooke Foster for Missoula's KECI 13.